"You're coming with me," said the lonely rancher to the woman beaten for giving birth to 3 girls. The sun had already begun its slow descent behind the jagged mountains of the frontier planet, painting the dusty plains in shades of red and orange. Elias Kane rode across the barren land on his old but reliable hoverbike, its engine humming softly beneath him. The air was dry, carrying the sharp scent of dust and scorched earth. He had been riding for hours, checking his perimeter, making sure nothing had moved while he was away. The frontier was lonely, almost too quiet, but that silence was all he knew. Elias was a man of few words, a loner by choice, hardened by years in a world that had little patience for weakness. His ranch was modest, a collection of solar domes, wind turbines, and a handful of genetically modified livestock designed to survive in the harsh climate. Life on this planet was a constant struggle, and Elias had learned to fight every day just to survive. But even in the emptiness of his existence, he held onto a sense of justice, a small light that had not yet been snuffed out by the cruelty of humanity. As he crested a small hill, something unusual caught his eye. A thin trail of smoke rose in the distance, not high enough to be from a fire used for warmth or cooking. His instincts kicked in. Elias slowed his hoverbike, scanning the horizon. The smoke was coming from the remains of a small settlement, one of the many scattered across the planet, most abandoned after the war. But this settlement still had signs of life, or what was left of it. Elias landed a short distance away, letting the bike settle on the dusty ground. He moved carefully toward the source of the smoke, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The settlement was in ruins. Buildings had collapsed, their metal frames twisted and burned. The ground was littered with debris, shattered tools, and scorched fabric. It looked like no one had survived, or at least that was what he thought until he heard a soft cry almost drowned by the wind. Following the sound, Elias rounded a broken wall and saw her. Myra. She was small, fragile-looking, but there was a fire in her eyes that refused to be extinguished. She crouched on the ground, shielding 3 tiny babies wrapped in tattered cloth. Her face was bruised, swollen, and smeared with dirt, but she held her children with a ferocity that stunned him. She had clearly been through hell. Elias knelt down a safe distance away, his voice calm but firm. "You need to come with me," he said. "It's not safe here." "They'll come back." Mara shook her head, gripping her children tightly. I can't leave them behind. Whoa." Her voice broke, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks. They'll take them, or worse." Elias' eyes hardened. He had seen the cruelty of humanity before, the way people could turn on each other in fear or greed. On this planet, a woman with 3 daughters was considered a burden, a liability. Mara's settlement had probably been attacked for the same reason. He could not let that happen. "Look at me," he said gently. "I'm not here to hurt you, but you can't stay here, not like this. You're coming with me, now." Her gaze flicked to his hoverbike, and for a moment, Elias saw a spark of hope. The wind caught her hair as she hesitated, torn between fear and desperation. Finally, she nodded slightly, her jaw trembling, and gathered the children closer. Elias offered his hand, and she took it, gripping it with a strength that belied her battered body. The journey began under the cover of the rising night. Elias led her to the hoverbike, carefully securing the babies in a specially designed carrier he had modified for his own needs on the ranch. Mara clung to the side of the bike as Elias started the engine, its hum louder in the stillness of the plain. He kept his eyes on the horizon, aware that danger could appear at any moment. As they rode, Mara began to speak in quiet bursts, almost to herself. "I don't know why anyone would help me," she said, her voice trembling. Everyone else, they left. Or worse." She trailed off, staring into the darkening sky. Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he focused on navigating the terrain, the dust and rocks making the ride dangerous. But after a few minutes, he finally spoke. "Humans are stubborn," he said. "We survive, and sometimes we fight for each other. You'll see." Her gaze met his, uncertain but curious. She wanted to believe him, and perhaps she had no other choice. The wind grew stronger as they approached a narrow canyon, the path ahead jagged and perilous. Elias slowed, carefully guiding the hoverbike along a winding trail. One wrong move and they would plunge into the rocky gorge below. Myra tightened her grip on the children, her eyes wide with fear. "You've done this before," she said finally, her voice soft. "You know this place?" Elias nodded without turning. "I know enough," he said. "And I've got you, that's what matters." The canyon was a test of endurance, a reminder of how unforgiving the frontier could be. Red dust swirled around them, clinging to their clothes and skin. Strange, howling winds rattled the metal and shook the ground. For a moment it felt as though the entire planet was against them, trying to stop their escape. But Elias pressed on, his hands steady on the controls, his focus unwavering. Hours passed. The night deepened, and the stars emerged, brilliant against the black sky. It was quiet now, but the silence was not comforting. It was tense, waiting. Mara, exhausted from fear and pain, leaned against Elias, finally allowing herself a moment of rest. The babies slept, their tiny bodies warm against her chest. "You saved us," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." Elias glanced at her, a flicker of emotion crossing his usually stoic face. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "Just survive, that's enough." They continued through the night, stopping only when the path became too treacherous. Elias led them into a hidden alcove, a small cave he had used before for shelter during storms. The hoverbike powered down, and the sudden quiet felt like a reprieve. He helped Mara settle the babies, making sure they were secure and comfortable. "I'll keep watch," he said. "You rest, you need your strength." Mara nodded, too tired to speak. As she closed her eyes, she thought of everything she had lost, her home, her friends, her safety, but also of this stranger who had risked everything for her. It was the first time in days she had felt even a flicker of hope. Elias stepped outside the cave, his eyes scanning the horizon. The red dust and darkness made it difficult to see far, but he could sense movement, the faint whir of distant drones. The militia wouldn't give up so easily. They never did. But Elias was ready. He had survived worse, and now he had something to fight for, not just himself, but the 3 fragile lives he had vowed to protect. The night wore on, long and cold, with the wind carrying the distant cries of creatures and the occasional hum of machinery. Elias stayed vigilant, his mind working through strategies, escape routes, and contingencies. He knew that this was only the beginning. Myra and her daughters had a long way to go, and the frontier would not forgive mistakes. But he also knew something more. Humans endured, even when the odds seemed impossible. They adapted, they survived, and sometimes they protected each other in ways that no one else would. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the canyon walls in pale gold, Elias returned to the cave. Mara was awake, feeding one of the babies. The others stirred, their tiny eyes blinking in the morning light. For a brief moment, the world felt quiet and safe, and Elias allowed himself to breathe. "We'll keep going," he said softly, almost to himself. "We'll make it through." Myra looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and determination. "I believe you," she said. "And I believe we can." Elias nodded. The road ahead would be difficult, full of danger and uncertainty, but he knew this. As long as humans had courage, ingenuity, and heart, they could survive anything. And now, with these 3 tiny lives in his care, he had a reason to fight harder than ever before. The frontier was harsh, and the night had been merciless, but a new day had begun. And with it, a fragile, burning hope for survival, for life, and for the enduring strength of humanity. The morning light spread slowly across the canyon, warming the red dust and casting long shadows between the jagged rocks. Elias and Mara had spent the night huddled in the small cave, and now the babies stirred, their tiny cries cutting through the quiet like fragile bells. Myra, still bruised and exhausted, lifted the children one by one, murmuring soft words of comfort as she checked their small bodies for scratches or discomfort. Elias watched silently, letting her take the lead. There were no words for this kind of care. It was instinct, something only a mother could do. Elias knew that staying in the canyon for long was dangerous. The militia would search the region, and they would not stop until they found her and her children. He had seen their type before, ruthless, efficient, and without mercy. They hunted survivors, taking what they wanted, leaving destruction in their wake. Mara's settlement had been destroyed for a reason, and he was determined not to let that happen again. "Can they walk yet?" Elias asked quietly, nodding toward the babies. Mara shook her head. "Not yet, a few weeks maybe. Right now they only eat, sleep, and cry. That's all I can give them." Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of worry. "Will we make it to somewhere safe?" Elias studied the horizon. The canyon walls were steep, and the plain beyond was open and exposed. There was a small settlement to the north, hidden in the mountains, a place he had visited once long ago. Few people knew of it, and it had survived because it was remote. "We'll make it," he said firmly. It's not far, but we need to move carefully. Mara nodded, trusting him, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Together, they loaded the babies back onto the hoverbike, securing them carefully in the padded carriers Elias had designed. It was difficult keeping them safe while traveling over rough terrain, but Elias had faced worse dangers in his life, and he would not let them fall now. The hoverbike lifted off the ground, hovering over the dusty plains. Elias guided it skillfully, avoiding jagged rocks and loose soil that could throw them off balance. The wind tore at Mara's hair and clothes, but she held fast, her hands gripping the side rails. The babies slept, unaware of the danger surrounding them, trusting only the humans who carried them. Hours passed as they crossed the open land. The sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive. Elias searched for water sources along the way, scanning the terrain with a small device attached to his wrist. Finally, in the middle of a dry riverbed, he spotted a patch of green, small shrubs, and a shallow pool. He brought the hoverbike down gently and helped Mara carry the babies to the water. "Drink carefully," he said, handing her a container. "You need strength. They need it too." Mara knelt by the water, dipping her hands and letting the babies sip cautiously. The little ones squealed softly, their tiny fingers grasping her hands. For a brief moment, the world seemed peaceful, as if the red dust and rocky plains had vanished. Elias allowed himself to relax, knowing the danger was still out there but feeling a rare flicker of hope. The quiet did not last long. In the distance, a low hum reached Elias' ears, the sound of drones. He froze, listening carefully. The militia had found their trail. He could see the faint outlines of their machines moving with calculated precision over the hills. He glanced at Mara, whose face had turned pale, and then back at the drones. There was no time to hesitate. "Hold on," he said. The hoverbike lifted off again, rising above the shrubs and riverbed. Elias accelerated, weaving between rocks and gullies, using the natural terrain to shield them. Mara held her children tightly, murmuring comforting words as the wind whipped around them. The drones followed, relentless, their sensors scanning for any sign of life. Elias knew he had to outsmart them. The drones were fast and precise, but they lacked imagination, lacked the ability to adapt like humans. He led them toward a narrow canyon, one that twisted sharply and had overhangs and sharp cliffs. The drones followed blindly, unable to maneuver as well as the hoverbike. Rocks tumbled from the cliffs above, and Elias guided the bike with perfect timing, forcing several drones to crash or lose track. Mara gasped, holding the babies closer as the dust and debris filled the air. When the last drone broke off, either destroyed or unable to follow, Elias let out a slow breath. "We're not safe yet," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But we've bought time." Mara nodded, her face streaked with dust and sweat. You saved us again," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "I don't know how you do it." Elias shrugged, a small smile touching his lips. "Humans survive, that's what we do, no matter what, we keep going." They continued their journey through the canyon, moving carefully but steadily. The terrain became more forgiving as they climbed higher into the mountains. Small patches of vegetation appeared, and streams of water trickled from hidden springs. Mara grew more confident, helping Elias scan the terrain and keep the babies safe. She realized that she was learning something new, survival in a world that seemed designed to destroy them, and the strength she had within herself to endure. By evening, they reached a plateau with a clear view of the surrounding mountains. In the distance, tucked between cliffs, Elias pointed to a cluster of structures partially hidden by natural rock formations. "That's the settlement," he said. "We'll rest there tonight. They'll help us and we can plan the next stage." Mara looked at the settlement with cautious hope. "Do you think will they take us in?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Humans take care of each other when we have to, you'll see, but we have to be careful, make no mistakes. This place has survived because it's smart, not because it's weak." They approached the settlement cautiously. As they got closer, a small figure appeared at the entrance, armed with a simple energy rifle. The figure froze for a moment, eyes widening at the sight of the hoverbike and the children. Then, after a tense pause, the figure lowered the weapon. Elias stepped forward. "We mean no harm," he said. "She and the children need shelter." The figure studied them for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me," they said. The voice was calm, steady, and commanding. "You're lucky you found this place. Few get through the canyon without trouble." Inside the settlement, Mara was amazed. It was not large, but it was organized, clean, and surprisingly advanced. Solar panels and wind turbines dotted the rooftops. Small gardens and water purification systems provided food and water. Children played safely under the watchful eyes of adults who moved with purpose and care. It was unlike anything Mara had seen in a long time, humans thriving against all odds. She set the babies down gently, checking their safety. We might survive here," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "We might really survive." Elias gave her a reassuring nod. "We will," he said, "but we can't get comfortable. We have to be ready for anything. The frontier doesn't forgive mistakes." That night, Mara stayed awake, watching the babies sleep in the secure cradle provided by the settlement. Elias patrolled outside, ensuring that the perimeter was safe. The sounds of the wind and distant wildlife filled the night, but Mara no longer felt the same fear she had felt in the canyon. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope, a belief that life could continue, that humans could endure even when the world seemed against them. The next morning brought new challenges. Elias introduced Mara to the settlement's leader, a woman named Selene, who was wary but not unkind. Selene examined the babies carefully, assessing their health, and then looked at Mara. "You've been through a lot," she said. "But if you want to survive here, you'll need to adapt. This is not a safe world for the weak." Mara nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "I have to, for them." She gestured to her daughters. Selene studied her for a moment longer and then nodded. "Good, we'll teach you. But remember this, the frontier tests every human. Only those who endure, who think, who act, survive." Elias watched the interaction quietly, proud of Mara. He knew she had strength that even she had not discovered yet. He also knew that the journey was far from over. The militia could strike again at any time, and even if they survived, the harsh frontier would continue to challenge them. But for now, they had a chance, a fragile, shining chance to live, to heal, and to prepare for the battles ahead. Over the next days, Mara began learning the ways of the settlement. She learned how to purify water, how to grow food in rocky soil, and how to navigate the terrain. Elias stayed by her side, guiding her, teaching her how humans survived through courage, ingenuity, and determination. The babies grew stronger each day, their cries replaced with tiny coos and laughter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains again, Mara stood on a small hill overlooking the settlement. She held one of the babies while the others slept inside. Elias joined her, his eyes on the horizon. "They'll try again," he said. "The militia, but we'll be ready." Mara nodded, her heart full of both fear and hope. "We'll survive," she said. "We have to." Elias smiled faintly, a rare expression for a man so used to solitude. "Humans always do," he said. "Always." And as the stars began to appear, shining brightly against the dark sky, Mara felt it too, a deep, unshakable belief in the strength of life, the endurance of humans, and the hope that even in the harshest places, survival was possible. The hidden settlement was nestled in the folds of the mountains, almost invisible from the outside. Walls of rock shielded it from prying eyes, and the layout was clever. Paths twisted and turned so that intruders could easily become lost while the residents moved freely. Elias guided Mara through the narrow entrances, the hoverbike humming quietly beneath them as they passed through natural tunnels and arches. The settlement seemed alive, not just with people, but with purpose. Children ran along the pathways, playing and laughing under the watchful eyes of adults. Gardens stretched across terraces, their crops fed by carefully channeled streams. Wind turbines turned slowly and solar panels glinted in the sunlight. Mara could barely believe it. In the harshest reaches of the frontier, here was a place that not only survived but thrived. Selene, the settlement leader, had waited at the main square to greet them. She was tall, strong, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her stance was calm but authoritative, the kind that commanded respect without fear. She studied Mara and the babies carefully. "You made it this far," Selene said quietly, her voice steady. "That is no small feat. Few women survive what you have endured. And these children, 3 girls in a world that values strength above all, it is remarkable." Mara clutched her babies closer, their tiny heads resting on her shoulders. I just wanted them to live," she whispered. "I didn't know how to do anything else." Selene nodded. "Then you're like all humans. You survive because you must, you fight because it is necessary, and you endure because the future depends on it." Elias spoke from behind Mara. She's strong, she will learn, and she will protect them. Seleni's gaze softened slightly. Good. Strength alone is not enough. You must know the world, understand it, and act before it acts on you. We will teach her, and your children, everything they need to survive. The days that followed were intense for Mara. She had never experienced a community so focused, so coordinated. Every adult had a role, every child a lesson. The settlement operated like a living organism, each part necessary for survival. Mara learned to navigate the rocky terrain, how to carry water safely over long distances, how to use tools she had only seen in ruins before. Her favorite lessons were about strategy. Selene taught her how to read the land, how to anticipate danger, and how to use it to her advantage. Mara began to see the world differently, not just as a place to survive, but as a puzzle to solve. Every rock, every canyon, every ridge had meaning, and understanding it could save lives. Elias remained close, offering guidance and reassurance. The bond between him and Mara deepened, though neither spoke of it. Their focus was on survival, on the children, and on the knowledge that every decision could mean life or death. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the settlement gathered for a routine meeting. Selene addressed the community, explaining the need for vigilance. The militia that had attacked Mara's home was still out there. They were organized, relentless, and they would not stop searching. Elias tightened his grip on Mara's hand as they listened. The reality of the threat was heavy, but the settlement was prepared. Automated turrets were stationed at key points. Energy barriers could be activated to block access, and the adults were trained to fight in coordinated patterns. The militia might have numbers, but the humans of this settlement had ingenuity, strategy, and determination. After the meeting, Mara returned to her children. She looked at their small, sleeping faces and realized something profound. These girls, her daughters, were part of something greater now. They were not just survivors. They were the next generation of humans who would endure, adapt, and thrive no matter what challenges came. The next morning brought their first real test. Scouts reported movement in the distance, a small group approaching the settlement. The adults gathered quickly, preparing defenses and positioning themselves strategically. Mara watched, learning as the humans she now relied on moved with precision and confidence. She realized how far she had come. She was no longer helpless, no longer a passive survivor. Elias leaned close. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Watch and learn. We act only when necessary. Humans survive because we think ahead, not just because we fight." The group approaching the settlement turned out to be scouts from the militia, sent to probe defenses and gather information. They were heavily armed, but unaware of the traps and obstacles laid in their path. Automated turrets activated, sending warning pulses that disabled their sensors. Rocks and debris shifted, creating barriers that slowed their advance. Mara's heart pounded, but she followed Elias' instructions. She helped carry supplies to reinforce weak points, observed patterns, and anticipated where the militia might try to strike next. The battle was not one of brute force, but of strategy and cunning. The militia, confident in their technology, underestimated the humans' adaptability. Hours passed, the engagement intense but controlled. The militia eventually retreated, frustrated and defeated. The settlement had held, their defenses effective and their coordination impeccable. Mara felt a surge of pride, not just in herself, but in humanity. These people, with their determination and intelligence, had survived against impossible odds. After the scouts retreated, the settlement worked to repair minor damages and tend to those who had minor injuries. Mara tended to the children, soothing them after the noise and chaos. Elias stood nearby, surveying the terrain, always vigilant. "That was close," Mara said quietly. Elias nodded. "Too close, but we learned something. Humans can adapt. We can survive even when it seems impossible. That's why we endure." Selene approached Mara later, her expression serious. "You did well today. You moved with purpose, helped where you were needed, and learned quickly. That is what survival demands. But know this is only the beginning. The militia will return stronger and smarter, and every day you survive, every lesson you learn will matter." Mara looked at her children, their tiny eyes bright with curiosity and life. "I will do whatever it takes," she said. "I will make sure they live." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "And they will, together we'll ensure it." In the following days, Mara integrated fully into the settlement. She learned advanced survival techniques, how to detect ambushes, how to move silently over rocky terrain, how to communicate without revealing positions. The adults treated her as one of them, offering guidance but never holding back expectations. Every mistake was a lesson, every success a step forward. The triplets grew rapidly, their resilience apparent even in the earliest days. They learned to react instinctively, to sense danger before it came, and to rely on the humans around them. Mara watched them, pride swelling in her chest. They were living proof of humanity's endurance, the next generation ready to face the frontier with courage and ingenuity. One evening, as Mara and Elias walked along a ridge overlooking the settlement, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset, she spoke quietly. "I never thought humans could be this strong. Even in a world that wants to destroy us, we keep going." Elias nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "That's what makes us human. We endure, we adapt, we protect each other even when it's risky, and we thrive where others would fail." Mara looked down at her children, playing safely under the watchful eyes of other settlement members. "I want them to grow strong," she said. "Not just survive, but thrive. They should never know what it's like to feel helpless." Elias smiled faintly. "They will learn from you and from all of us. Humans survive because we pass on knowledge, courage, and hope. That is our greatest strength." Night fell, and the settlement glowed softly with lights powered by solar energy. Mara sat with her daughters in the central garden, watching the stars begin to appear. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that they were not alone in the universe. The sounds of the frontier, the wind, distant creatures, and the subtle hum of machinery were no longer intimidating. They were part of a world humans could master, a world they could survive and shape. Mara held her children close, promising silently to protect them, to teach them, and to ensure that the human spirit remained unbroken. Elias patrolled the outer perimeter, his eyes scanning for threats. The militia might return, but the settlement was ready, and Mara, too, was ready. She had learned more in these days than she had in a lifetime, and she had discovered a strength within herself that she had not known existed. The frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but humans, she realized now, were harsher. They endured, they adapted, and they thrived. And Mara, Elias, and the children were living proof of that enduring truth. As the first light of dawn approached, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Mara felt a deep sense of hope. The journey was far from over. Challenges would come, dangers would test them, and the frontier would demand every ounce of their strength. But for the first time, she believed they could survive anything. The settlement had begun to feel like home. Walls of rock and earth provided protection, gardens flourished under careful hands, and the small streams fed the community with fresh water. Mara walked through the pathways, carrying one of her daughters, while the other two clung to her side. For the first time since the attacks, she allowed herself to breathe, though the lessons of the frontier had taught her to never let her guard down completely. Elias followed her quietly, scanning the horizon as they walked. He had patrolled the perimeter for weeks, mapping the safest paths, setting traps for intruders, and teaching Mara how to read the land. The militia was still out there somewhere, planning their next move. He knew that sooner or later they would return. But the humans of the settlement were ready, and Mara had become a part of that readiness. The day began with training. Selene had organized a series of exercises for the adults and older children of the settlement. Mara observed first, then joined in. She learned how to move quietly over rocky terrain, how to use the environment to her advantage, and how to anticipate attacks before they happened. Every lesson was practical, every exercise a preparation for survival. The triplets watched with curiosity from a safe distance, their small hands clutching the bars of their play area. Even at their age, Mara noticed, they were learning to observe, to notice patterns, to understand the movements of the people around them. It was instinctive, the kind of learning that humans had done for generations. Mara smiled faintly, realizing that her daughters were already being shaped by the strength of those who had survived before them. During a break, Mara sat with Elias on a rock overlooking the settlement. The wind was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of earth and vegetation. "They're learning fast," Mara said softly, watching the triplets imitate the older children. "Do you think they'll be strong enough someday?" Elias glanced at her, a small smile on his face. "They'll be stronger than most. Humans survive because we learn, because we adapt, and because we protect the next generation. Your daughters will carry that forward." Mara felt a swell of pride and a pang of fear. The frontier was harsh, unforgiving, and full of dangers. She had seen what the militia could do, and she knew that their attacks were not over. But here, in this hidden settlement, she felt a spark of hope. They could survive, they could thrive, and they could raise a generation that would endure where others might fall. The afternoon brought the first sign of trouble. Scouts reported movement near the outer ridges, small figures slipping between rocks, watching the settlement. Elias and Selene moved quickly to assess the situation. The militia had returned, and this time they were cautious, sending spies first to test defenses and gather information. Mara watched as the adults prepared. Energy barriers were activated at key points, hidden turrets rotated to cover blind spots, and strategically placed decoys were deployed to confuse intruders. Every member of the settlement had a role, and everyone moved with purpose. Mara assisted where she could, helping to reinforce barriers and distribute supplies to those on watch. Hours passed, and the tension grew. The spies moved closer, but the humans of the settlement had anticipated them. Traps were triggered, sensors activated, and several drones sent by the militia were disabled before they could report back. Mara felt a rush of pride. She had learned quickly, and her actions had contributed to the settlement's defense. As night fell, the militia made their move. A small strike team approached the settlement under cover of darkness, trying to exploit any weakness. But the humans were ready. Automated turrets activated, lights flashed to disorient intruders, and the adults moved in coordinated patterns, blocking every possible entry point. Mara found herself in the middle of the defense, guiding the children and assisting where she could. The engagement was intense but controlled. The militia underestimated the humans' adaptability and coordination. Rocks were used as barriers, fire signals communicated positions, and the terrain itself became a tool of defense. Mara realized something profound. Humans thrived not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they could think, adapt, and act where others could not. By the time the first light of dawn broke across the mountains, the militia had retreated, leaving the settlement intact. The humans had held their defenses proven, their strategy successful. Mara felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had survived the attack, and in doing so, had learned more about themselves and their capabilities than any training could teach. Selene gathered the settlement members for a debriefing. "We survived because we planned, because we adapted, and because we acted together," she said. "This is what makes us human. We endure, we thrive, and we protect those who cannot protect themselves." Mara nodded, glancing at her daughters. Even at this young age, they had sensed the danger and the defense. They were learning resilience and vigilance, absorbing lessons from every moment. Mara felt a surge of hope. These girls and the settlement as a whole represented the strength and ingenuity of humanity. In the following days, the settlement worked to repair minor damages and reinforce defenses. Mara learned new skills: how to construct barriers quickly, how to set early warning systems, and how to anticipate enemy movements. Every lesson built confidence and competence. She was no longer simply surviving. She was preparing for the future, for the battles yet to come. Elias remained a constant presence, guiding her, teaching her, and reminding her of the importance of patience and strategy. "Humans survive because we act before we are forced to," he said one evening. "We think, we prepare, and we protect. That is what separates us from those who fail." Mara absorbed his words, feeling the truth in them. She had seen helplessness and cruelty, but she had also seen courage and ingenuity. And she knew that the future depended on both, the courage to act and the wisdom to plan. The triplets continued to grow and learn. Even in their play, Mara noticed their awareness of the world around them. They observed, they mimicked, and they responded instinctively to cues and patterns. Mara marveled at their resilience, realizing that even in the harshest conditions, humans could adapt from birth. These children, she knew, were living proof of humanity's enduring strength. One night, Mara sat outside with Elias, watching the stars spread across the sky. The air was calm, and the settlement rested in the quiet of the mountains. "Do you think we can really keep them safe?" she asked quietly, holding her daughters close. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "We will. We have survived worse. Humans endure because we fight for each other, because we teach the next generation, and because we never give up. These girls will grow up strong just as the settlement has grown strong, and one day they'll lead in ways we cannot imagine." Mara smiled, feeling a rare sense of peace. She knew the frontier would continue to challenge them, that dangers would come again, and that survival would always demand vigilance. But for the first time, she felt confident that they could face whatever came next. The next morning brought a new challenge. Scouts reported signs of a larger militia force moving through the mountains. This was no simple strike team. It was an organized group, better armed and more coordinated than the previous attacks. The settlement had to prepare for a real battle, a test not just of survival, but of ingenuity, coordination, and courage. Mara moved quickly, helping to distribute supplies, reinforcing barriers, and organizing the children into safe zones. She worked alongside Elias and Selene, applying everything she had learned. The settlement operated like a single organism, each part vital to the whole. Mara realized how much she had changed, how she had grown from a frightened, battered woman into someone capable of contributing meaningfully to the defense of an entire community. When the militia arrived, the battle began. Lights flashed across the mountain slopes, automated turrets activated, and humans moved with precision and purpose. Mara stayed with the children, keeping them safe while watching the adults fight with strategy and courage. Rocks tumbled down slopes to slow the attackers, hidden barriers forced them into traps, and the terrain itself became a weapon. Hours passed, the battle intense but controlled. The militia was forced to retreat, unable to breach the settlement's defenses. Humans had once again triumphed, not because of strength alone, but because of ingenuity, strategy, and coordination. Mara felt a deep sense of pride, both in the settlement and in herself. After the battle, the settlement repaired damages and tended to minor injuries. Mara held her daughters, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the satisfaction of accomplishment. They had survived another attack, learned more about strategy and courage, and grown stronger as a community. Elias approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They'll come again," he said. "The frontier never rests, but we are ready and we will endure." Mara looked at the settlement, at the adults and children who had fought together, and at her daughters, their eyes bright and curious. "We will survive," she said softly. "We will endure and they will grow strong. This is what it means to be human." And as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the red plains, Mara felt a deep, unshakable certainty. Humans endured, humans adapted, humans thrived. And in this hidden settlement, against all odds, life would continue, stronger, smarter, and unbroken. The dawn broke slowly over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The settlement was quiet, almost peaceful, but everyone knew this calm was temporary. Scouts had reported a large militia force moving through the mountains. This was not a small strike team. This was an organized army, determined to destroy the settlement and claim what they could. Elias stood at the top of a ridge, his eyes scanning the distance. Mara joined him, holding the triplets in her arms. The children stirred, blinking sleepily at the morning light. Even at this young age, they seemed to sense the tension around them. Mara hugged them tightly, feeling both fear and determination. These girls were the future, and she would protect them at any cost. "We've faced them before," Elias said quietly, "but this is bigger. We'll need every bit of what we've learned." Mara nodded. "We can do it. They won't break us." The settlement prepared quickly. Selene had already organized teams for defense, using lessons learned from previous attacks. Barricades were strengthened, sensors double-checked, and automated turrets positioned to cover every possible path of approach. Humans were moving with purpose, each action deliberate, each plan precise. Mara helped guide the children to a safe zone, a sheltered area inside the settlement, away from the perimeter. Even though they were young, she knew they had to feel secure. Fear could be as dangerous as any weapon in this moment. The triplets nestled together, their tiny hands gripping her fingers as she whispered soothing words. The first signs of the militia appeared in the distance, dust clouds rising from the rocky slopes, small figures moving with careful precision. Scouts reported their positions, and the adults prepared. Unlike previous encounters, the humans of the settlement were not reacting. They were anticipating. Every trap, every barrier, every hidden turret was ready. Elias stood beside Mara, his hands resting on the controls of a small monitoring device. "Remember," he said, "they have technology, but we have strategy, adaptation, and heart. Humans survive because we think ahead." The militia approached cautiously, but the settlement was ready. Rocks and debris had been placed to funnel them into narrow paths where they could be observed and controlled. Automated turrets activated as soon as the first scouts crossed the line. Pulses of energy disabled their sensors, and hidden lights disoriented them. The militia moved cautiously, realizing that the humans were not ordinary targets. Mara watched, holding her daughter's clothes. She noticed how humans worked together, instinctively covering each other, communicating silently with gestures and prearranged signals. She felt a surge of pride. She had learned this too, how to adapt, how to anticipate, how to act when it mattered most. The militia advanced slowly, but every step brought them into a carefully prepared trap. Rocks tumbled from cliffs, creating barriers and forcing them to change direction. Hidden nets and devices immobilized their vehicles, while humans moved strategically to block escape routes. Mara realized that strength alone would not win the day. Thinking, ingenuity, and courage would. Hours passed. The engagement was tense but controlled. The militia tried to break through, but the humans of the settlement anticipated every move. Mara assisted wherever she could, reinforcing barriers, distributing supplies, and observing the patterns of movement. Even from her position, she could see how humans used the environment as a weapon, turning cliffs, rocks, and narrow paths into strategic advantages. By mid-afternoon, the militia's advance had slowed. Their numbers and technology gave them confidence, but they underestimated the humans' ability to adapt. Mara realized that every skill she had learned over the past weeks was now being used in practice. She moved quickly, making decisions that saved time and resources, proving to herself that she was no longer helpless. Finally, the militia attempted a direct assault on the settlement's main gate. Selene and Elias coordinated a counterattack. Humans moved with precision, using short bursts of movement to confuse and outmaneuver their opponents. Traps and obstacles slowed the militia further, and their attempts to regroup were met with quick, strategic responses. Mara watched, heart pounding, as her community defended itself. She thought of her daughters and the future they represented. This was not just a battle for survival, it was a battle for hope, for life, and for the human spirit. The settlement's defenses were strong, but what truly made the difference was ingenuity. Mara noticed how humans could improvise, creating new solutions in the moment. Barricades were shifted, energy pulses redirected, and small teams moved like chess pieces, anticipating the enemy's moves. Every action was calculated, every choice meaningful. Hours of tension turned into a decisive moment. The militia, exhausted and frustrated, tried one final push. Humans responded with coordinated precision. Rocks tumbled down cliffs, automated turrets fired in carefully timed bursts, and humans moved in patterns that the militia could not predict. One by one, their vehicles were disabled and their forces began to retreat. Mara felt relief wash over her as the dust cleared. The settlement had held. Humans had triumphed not because of brute force, but because of intelligence, preparation, and cooperation. She hugged her daughters tightly, tears of relief and pride streaming down her face. These children, she knew, were the embodiment of humanity's endurance. Elias joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We survived," he said quietly. "Humans endure because we think, adapt, and protect each other. That is our greatest strength," Mara nodded. "And they'll keep surviving," she said, glancing at her daughters. "They'll grow strong, and one day they'll lead." The settlement worked through the evening, repairing minor damages and tending to those who had minor injuries. The humans of the community were exhausted but unbroken. Mara realized that survival was not just about fighting, it was about learning, adapting, and preparing for the next challenge. That night, the settlement gathered around a small fire. Children played safely, adults shared stories, and Mara watched her daughters, their tiny eyes bright with curiosity. She felt a deep sense of hope. Humans had survived against impossible odds before, and they would do so again. The frontier might be harsh, the world unforgiving, but humans endured because they had courage, intelligence, and heart. Elias sat beside Mara, looking at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. "They'll come again," he said softly. "The frontier never rests. But humans endure, we always adapt, and we always survive." Mara smiled faintly, feeling the truth in his words. "And they'll thrive," she said, looking at her daughters. "Not just survive, but thrive, that's what we're teaching them." Days turned into weeks. The settlement became stronger, the defenses more sophisticated. and Mara continued to learn and contribute. The triplets grew quickly, their curiosity matched only by their instinct to observe and learn. They began to mimic the adults, their small hands practicing simple tasks, their eyes scanning the environment, and their movements reflecting the lessons they absorbed without even realizing it. Elias watched them sometimes, a rare smile crossing his face. "They're learning faster than I expected," he said. "Humans survive because we pass knowledge forward. These girls, they're already proving that." Myra felt the same sense of pride and hope. Her daughters were not just survivors. They were the next generation of humans, inheriting resilience, intelligence, and courage. She realized that the future depended on this, on teaching, on guiding, and on passing forward the skills and values that had allowed humanity to endure. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Myra and Elias stood on a ridge, watching the settlement below. The children played safely, the adults worked together, and the mountains stood silent and strong around them. "We've come a long way," Myra said quietly. Elias nodded. "And we'll go further. Humans endure, adapt, and thrive. That's what makes us strong. And now your daughters will carry that forward, one day leading others to do the same." Myra looked at the triplets, imagining their future, strong, clever, and fearless. They would face challenges, yes, but they would face them with the strength of all those who had survived before them. They were part of something greater, a living proof of humanity's endurance. The stars filled the sky, each one a tiny reminder of how vast the universe was. Myra held her daughters close, whispering a promise to them and to herself. "We'll survive," she said softly. "We'll endure, and we'll thrive no matter what comes." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, looking out across the mountains. "Humans always do," he said. "And now you and these girls will carry that forward. One day, others will follow, and the frontier will be ours, not because it is easy, but because we endure where others fail." The night stretched on, calm and full of quiet promise. The settlement, hidden in the folds of the mountains, was safe, for now, but more than that, it was alive. The humans within it had proven that they could survive, adapt, and triumph against impossible odds. Mara knew that the frontier would continue to challenge them, that dangers would arise, and that survival would always demand vigilance and courage. But she also knew that humans, as a species, would continue to endure. They would continue to learn, to adapt, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. And her daughters, her precious girls, were already a part of that legacy, carrying within them the strength, ingenuity, and courage of humanity itself. The dawn would come again, bringing new challenges, new tests, and new victories. And the humans of this settlement, Elias, Mara, her daughters, and all those who had survived and endured, would face them together, unbroken, resourceful, and strong. For humans endured. Humans adapted, and humans thrived,